Hello, I'm Gavin Hoey and you're watching the Technique of the Month from Digital Photo Magazine. This month we're going to have a look at something that gets a little bit overlooked by us photographers. We're going to have a look at paintbrushes. In fact, we're going to have a look at how you can make your own paintbrushes using your own photographs or graphics that you've created. I'm going to make an effect that looks a little bit like the good old starburst filters that you may have used in years gone by. So this is an image I'd like to turn into a paintbrush, but there's a very small unknown fact about paintbrushes. Their maximum size of any paintbrush is 2,500 pixels on its longest edge. So to turn a picture into a paintbrush, it has to be 2,500 pixels or smaller. So let's check this one fits that bill. Let's come up to Image, Resize and Image Size, and you'll see this image is indeed 2,500 pixels, so anything below that's okay. Right, to turn this into a paintbrush is a dead simple matter. Come up to Edit and choose Define Brush right there. Click that and it'll turn your picture into a paintbrush, but it will ask you to give it a name. Now, give it a name that means something, because you're going to want to find this again. And this particular name is the default name. It's the name of the file. And in this case, that works fine. So we'll just click OK. And that is it. You've now made your very own paintbrush. Don't believe me? Well, let's have a little look. Let's grab ourselves the paintbrushes. And we'll choose the very last one on our list. Here it is. And hey presto, look at that. It matches the picture. And if I click, it's a paintbrush. Like that. And it works just like an ordinary paintbrush, so I can change the size if I want to, just like that. Marvellous. I can change the colour. The colour of your paintbrush is always whatever your foreground colour is. So although our original picture was black, it's come out red because that's our foreground colour. If you want a green brush, change it to green and there we go. So you can see how this works. What happens is Photoshop Elements looks at the picture you defined as a brush. Anything that's pure white becomes completely transparent and it works absolutely perfectly every time. Right, so that's one. Let's make another one whilst we're going. Let's just get rid of that one and use this picture instead. Now this again, this is going to make a nice sort of starburst effect, but this, rather than having that small thin look, is a much wider, fatter look. This is more like a burst of sunlight coming out from the clouds. But it's exactly the same effect as before. So we'll come up to Edit and we'll choose Define Brush. Now if for any reason Define Brush is greyed out, it probably means that your image is too big to make it into a paintbrush. So you need to go and reduce the size. But this one fits a treat, so we'll click Define Brush. Again, we can give it a name, but once again the file name is fine for me, that makes sense. So we'll click OK, and now we have yet another paintbrush. And again, it works just like all the other paintbrushes. Wonderful. So there we go. Look at that. Very, very modern art. Yeah, very nice. But it's not really photography, is it? So let's get ourselves back to photography and get a real picture onto the screen. And it's this picture that I want to put that starburst effect onto. But before we start doing anything clever to our pictures, let's look at the picture itself. Does it look ready and finished? No, it doesn't, if I'm honest with you. This is how it was, but it's come out a little bit underexposed, it's a little bit lacking in colour, and it just doesn't look sunny enough. So let's give this a real burst of life by going up to Enhance, Adjust Lighting, and choose Levels. Now on the levels histogram, we can see what's going on here. Here's the main bulk of the histogram. It's all pushed up towards the left-hand side. That usually means that your image is probably a little underexposed. But not to worry, we'll get ourselves the white point. Now that's the slider down here on the right-hand side, and we'll slide it in towards the middle. As we do, you see our picture becomes much, much brighter and looks a lot more summery. That looks much better. I may just bring the little black point in, that's the one here on the left, just to bump up the contrast a little bit. Not too much, just a wee bit. Something like that. That looks pretty good, I think. And we'll click OK. So our picture now looks a lot more summery, and we're ready to put some bursts of light onto it. But we're not going to just stick them straight onto the picture. We want to try and give ourselves the chance to adjust this slightly, so we're going to use layers. Now if you can't see layers, come up to Window and choose Layers from the drop-down list. Now at the moment there's just one single layer. That's the standard way that Photoshop Elements works. So let's get another layer onto there. I'm going to come up to Layer, choose New, and then Layer again. And we'll give it a name because that makes sense to do that. So let's call this, let's call that Starburst number 1. There we go. And on that layer, we're going to start painting our starburst effect onto these glasses. Now, the first thing to choose is the colour. Remember, the paintbrush was whatever colour your foreground colour is. Mine's bright red. Really, I'd like this to be white, so let's just swap that colour over. So now I have white as my foreground colour. I'm using that last brush that we defined, the big, soft, sort of cloudburst one. And I'm just going to put a single click about there between the two glasses. And you can see that gives that kind of real zing of light through there. That's incredibly amazing. But it doesn't quite work for me. It's perhaps just a little bit overpowering. Now, this is why we've worked in layers, because what we can do now is try a few things to blend this in a wee bit. We could drop the opacity slider down a little bit, so it's perhaps not as bright as it was before, and that's kind of okay, but it's still not quite working. So we're going to try something else. We're going to try blend modes. Currently the blend mode is set to normal, but I'm pretty sure if we change it to overlay, that should give a nice kind of effect. Yeah, there we go. Overlay gives an increase in the contrast as well as blending it in. If I flip that layer on and off, you can see that's what we started with, and that gives that nice zing of light through it. Now those bubbles are really, really looking sparkly. So that's looking pretty good, but I'd like to add some small little kind of streaks of light as well as this kind of big flare of light. So I'm going to do another layer, layer, new, and layer again. And we'll call this one Starburst 2. And we'll change brushes. So let's swap to the brush that we made right at the beginning, that kind of thinner starburst effect. This is the one that should look a lot more like the starburst filters. Now I'm going to shrink my brush size down. You can either shrink it down by using the size slider up here, or use the left and right square brackets on the keyboard, whichever you prefer. I'm also going to change the colour, because although that white looked really good on the first starburst, I often find having a little bit of colour in these smaller ones looks better. So we're going to change it just to a very, very pale yellow as our foreground colour, like that. And we're going to put a little zing just up here, like that. So just on that very small highlight on the top of the glass. Now, as before, it doesn't really look very convincing. So we're back to the layers, and let's try that overlay trick again. Yeah, that's working quite nicely, but it's still a little bit too bright, so we'll drop the opacity down, probably down to about 50% or so, just to try and blend that in. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Let's find a few other highlights. I'm going to shrink my brush down using the left square bracket. I'm going to put one just there, maybe one down here a little bit. And there's some bright bits down the bottom where it's just catching the light, so we'll put one or two in there. You'll notice I'm not putting hundreds of these in. It's tempting to do that, but less is more, to be honest. You want to put a few selected points of light rather than hundreds and hundreds all over the place. Like that. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. We now have our little bursts of light. Again, we'll turn them off. So that's what we've started with, and that's what we've ended up with. So the end effect has given that nice starburst effect. It's all fully controllable, and because you've made them as your own customized brushes, you can use these again on other photos.